builder experience. Okay, so Adit, welcome you, all to you.
Thank you everyone for joining today's meetup. Uh, Hi, I'm Adit. I'm a senior cloud engineer with Digital Alpha, and I'm also 11x AWS certified professional. I'm also a member of the AWS user group and a HashiCorp ambassador. So, what's the agenda for today, right? So, what are we going to discuss today, right? So, today I'll be sharing few highlights of the AWS reInvent conference. So, the AWS reInvent conference is a global event that is held every year in December, right? And it is basically, I'll be sharing my insights into key launches and the AWS services that were announced, right? Uh, so the purpose of the talk is to give you a better understanding of the latest development in AWS and help you prepare for your day-to-day operations, right? And I hope by the end of the talk, you'll be able to get a clear picture of what is there new in AWS, and also be able to take away a few services, explore the services further, right? So let's start with builder experience, right? So I'll be covering three topics today. First is builder experience, then there will also be DevOps, and then there will be data analytics, right? So I'll be covering three topics. Okay, so let's start with builder experience. So what's builder experience, right? So we are aware that a lot of builders like us want to explore AWS, right? But AWS is not that easy to begin with, right? So you face a lot of problems when you start with AWS, right? So for that, builder experience has a few. So with builder experience, what AWS does is it gives you a few services, a few focus areas to explore on, right? So few of the announcements are on builder experience we'll be going through, right? So those services or those announcements help you understand the AWS services better, and also you can explore these services and build something on your own. And it is easier to build these things, right, with builder experience. So we'll go through a few services. One of the key service that was launched, it's still in preview mode, right? So you'll see two tabs here. One is preview mode and one is GA. GA means general availability. Preview mode is basically a service is in preview. You'll have to sign up for it, and then AWS will give you access to that service. And general availability means the service is available to use, right? So yeah, we'll go with AWS Application Composer, right? So AWS Application Composer. So let's say you're going to build a lot of things, right? So you're new to serverless, you're new to infrastructure as code, right? So how do you build a serverless application, right? You'll use lambdas, you'll use API gateways, you'll use a lot of things to build a serverless application. But how do I deploy it, right? So I need to create infrastructure on AWS to deploy these services. And creating infrastructure is difficult, right? We all know you use Terraform, you use CDK, you use CloudFormation, right? Those are tools that are not easy to gather, right? You have a lot of YAML in that, right? So how do you go about creating the infrastructure for your serverless applications, right? So Application Composer is a new service that AWS has launched to help you do this, right? So what it does is basically backed by infrastructure as code, but you have a visually representative way of creating your infrastructure as code, right? So you drag and drop a few services, and then it basically helps you create a infrastructure as code for you, right? So it basically helps you create a CloudFormation template, and then you can modify a few things in and out, but it's basically a diagram as a code thing, right? So you have your diagram, you have your services, you put in the diagrams, and then you get it all running, right? So we'll see an example here. So here you can see an example of how this works, right? So I have a few Lambda functions, I put the Lambda functions in, I put the API gateway, and then I get a DynamoDB to connect it all, right? So here's a simple example of how you can get a serverless application created using infrastructure as code with the help of Application Composer, right? So it's a visual way of creating AWS services. You don't need to learn YAML. You don't need to be aware of CloudFormation to do this, right? It's still in preview mode, but you can sign up and learn more about the service. Okay, so what are the use cases? So as we discussed, right, the use cases are design and build new serverless applications, right? So Composer removes the learning curve, right? So as we mentioned that serverless services, you need to know a lot of serverless services. You need to know a lot of coding practices like YAML scripts and all. So it removes that. Then deploying serverless applications through ISC, correct? So it also removes your problems of deploying it, right? So you may be facing problems like, let's say I've created Terraform infrastructure, right? I've created CloudFormation infrastructure. How do I deploy it, right? There has to be an automated pipeline to deploy this all, right? So again, with application composer, you have all the services inbuilt in the console. You just, with a click of a button, you drag and drop a few services and you get everything to work, right? Okay, visualize your application architecture and configuration. So quickly understand your application architecture. So again, it's a very good way. So like I said, let's say I created an application with application composer, right? So I've created an architecture. Now I want to modify the architecture, right? Let's say in place of a Lambda function, I want to use two Lambda functions, one with an SQS in between, right? Something of that sort, right? So how do I do that, right? So then with an application composer, it becomes very easy. Have to just click, drop, and have an application and have a diagram for it, right? But with infrastructure as code, with Terraform or any other infrastructure as code practice, I'll have to redefine, re-architect the entire system, right? So that's a hard process. So visualizing it and getting a diagram format is way easier. Okay, so another new service that was announced is Code Catalyst, right? So essentially what Code Catalyst helps you do is, let's say I have a, like how do you deploy an AWS application, right? So I'll say that I have GitHub, then I push the changes, it goes to code commit, code build, code pipeline, code deploy, right? So those are the steps of deploying any pipeline, right? But someone who's new to AWS, right? He doesn't know code pipeline, right? How does he gather that knowledge to build the entire pipeline for himself, which is code commit, code build, code deploy, right? So those are the steps he doesn't know about, right? So this is again builder experience. You're new to things, you don't know how to explore things. AWS gives you a managed service, a service which is way easier to use and to help you with it, right? So what Code Catalyst helps you do is faster planning, development, and delivery lifecycle, right? So this is a service that you use to connect your delivery pipelines, right? So let's say I have an application that I want to deploy on AWS, right? So it is a GitHub application, right? And I'll basically connect it with GitHub. Then I'll put after connecting it with GitHub, also they have a inbuilt blueprints, right? So these blueprints help you deploy an application. So let's say I have a Vue.js application, I have a PHP application, right? So all of these applications, it's way easier to deploy these applications just by using a blueprint, right? So this is what Code Catalyst helps you do. There are few key things that we need to look into for Code Catalyst. Those are, let's say, Code Catalyst also helps you track your issues, right? So issues is seen above. Then there is also pull request. Those are, so like GitHub functionality is also inbuilt, provided by Code Catalyst. It's a portal for you to manage everything. You can add members to this console itself, and then you can put issues for each of them. You can get a blueprint in the sense that, let's say I want to, I have connected it with GitHub, right? So I have my application here. Now how do I deploy it, right? I don't want to do it with code build, code deploy, right? So I'll use a blueprint and I'll get the entire application to run with the same blueprint. And then I can save that blueprint and I can use it for other applications as well, right? So it's a very seamless approach, and everything is inbuilt into the console itself, right? So again, another new service that was not launched within the reInvent space, but it was launched a couple of months before, is part also of the reInvent, is Code Whisperer, right? It's still in preview, but like many of you have heard about ChatGPT, right? And Copilot, GitHub Copilot is also something that you have heard of, right? So what Code Whisperer helps you do is similar stuff, right? So if you have done GitHub Copilot, you've used GitHub Copilot in the past, then it helps you do the similar things, right? Now what is different here is you get AWS services support. So let's say I want to generate code recommendations, right? So I'm working on a code and I have to deploy a Lambda function, deploy a EC2 instance, right? So I want to write the code for it, right? So Code Whisperer helps you generate recommendations for you. It's built into the IDE. You just have to do a single sign-on, and then you can connect it with your existing systems, right? Again, it's in preview stage, but you can use it, and it's pretty similar to your GitHub Copilot, but it's inbuilt with the AWS services, right? So it has support for Python, Java, JavaScript, C, right? So this is good level of support, and IDEs also, it supports a lot of IDEs, right? Visual Studio Code, AWS Cloud9, right? So those are few good IDEs also it's supporting. Yeah, I think builder experience is cleared out, right? We have 3 good services that AWS has launched in the reInvent, which is for builder experience, right? Uh, Now have serverless as a new topic that we're going to be talking about. That will be covered by Chirag. Chirag is a AWS person who is in with the AWS user group for a long time, and he's also been a speaker for our AWS Community Day. Welcome, Chirag.
Thank you, Adit.